All right, if y'all are ready, hang on. Ornamental ginger for home landscapes. So we'll talk a little bit about the programs. You all know all of these programs are directed by AgriLife Extension. We are trying to affect our our community, our residents, as well as regional partners. We do this effectively through the programs that we have, like the Earthkind Landscaping Program. And to keep in mind, Earthkind Landscaping, this is a branding, right? AgriLife Extension has been providing outstanding research-based education in horticulture and gardening for over 50 years. But we do it more effectively through branded programs like the Earthkind Landscaping Program. It includes techniques for not only design, but best gardening practices. So today we'll be talking a little bit about the ginger plant family and its natural distribution. A little bit about plant and flower parts. You got to know what the parts look like to be able to appreciate their true beauty. Propagation and growing tips. And then we'll cover the bells of the ball, the genera Alpinia, Gelicostus, Costus, Curcuma, Globa, Hedychium, and Ginger. It's quite a large family. And then we'll look at some resources. So gingers are plants of the tropics. It's a very large plant family. The plant family is called Zingiberaceae. There's identified over 50 genera, which includes over 1,600 species within those genera. And the genera includes Alpinia, Curcuma, Globa, Hedychium, and Zingiber. These are genera that you will commonly see in nurseries and retail outlets for sale. These particular genera have been cultivated successfully, and that's why you see those. Now, even though there's more genera than that, still these are the ones that we will see in retail outlets and local places. These are plants of tropical Africa, Asia, and members of this family can be found in the Americas. The ones that we find here are on the East Coast, towards the East Coast. Those are used medicinally as well as edible. There are gingers that grow wild in the Carolinas, Tennessee, etc. Those plants are of concern because of overharvesting. But just to kind of come back to that, we do have members of the of Zingiber, the genera, here in the United States. They are considered to be important ornamental. They're considered to be important because of their ornamental value, because they are used as spices and medicinally as well. This is a picture. Most of the pictures that are in this presentation, either I took them or I have permission to use them. Now, the success to any gardening, of course, I'm speaking to the choir, is you have to know where you are to understand what kind of plants you can use in your environment. This chart that we're looking at, this is a copy of an online resource available from the USDA, the National Resources Conservation Service, and soil scientists have developed soil surveys. This kind of information has always been available in extension offices for over 60 years. If you wanted this kind of information, this is a basic foundation of the soil type that is found in our county. If you wanted this kind of information, if you were a developer or a producer, an individual that may be growing plants for crops, this information is extremely valuable. It tells you what the foundational information of what the subsoil is. Bottom line is we have variable soil types around our county. This kind of chart, while I find it interesting, I propose that it's not applicable to the average homeowner. Again, it's more applicable to producers as well as developers, maybe a homeowner who's looking at buying property out some acreage out in natural areas or areas where they can actually do that. This information might be more valuable to those folks that are thinking about constructing a home, etc. But the average homeowner this information may not be of value to them or beneficial for their use. What we do encourage you to concentrate on is this basic information that we give to the public. getting to know when the anticipated last freeze that we have annually, where we are in relation, to the USDA plant zones. Plant zones have been updated by the United States Department of Agriculture recently. The plant zones that we know about, we proudly talk to our neighbors or people that we meet in the grocery store about being in zone 9. We're in zone 9 and we stand on that. But it's good to help our constituents, our residents understand what that means. What these zones the zones have these zones have been developed by USDA from data that's been collected over a 30-year period. And what this is the average coldest temperature we potentially could reach annually. Now these maps have been updated. The USDA from my investigation, they've been updating these like every 10 years just to kind of see if anything has changed. And currently, the data collected indicates that we are becoming just slightly warmer in our area. So we've been bumped up about 5 degrees. Both the majority of Galveston County now, except for those crinkly little bits around the around the bays, we are now in zone 9B, which means potentially we could get a cold snap anywhere between 25 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit if you're on the island, Bolivar Peninsula, or again, maybe you're in San Leon or another Bay Cliff or another area closer to the water. You're now been allocated to zone 10A, which is about 30 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So what does this mean? It gives us a tool where we can think about the plants that may work in our area. But I do caution to, not really caution, but I do ask you to use this tool as well as other information to help you consider how you're going to be gardening in our area. So it's this general plant zone, map that's been developed, as well as any empirical data you can find. Right, you can go to the weather station. We've got a weather station here that we broadcast on our website. Find out what the local information is, determining if you have a micro environment. Maybe you've got a backyard that has somewhat protection, and it's going to stay a little bit warmer during the winter time and kind of beat the odds with these cold snaps or this cold weather we anticipate. As well as your experience, if you've been here for over 30 years and you've been gardening in a particular fashion, you're going to know what you're going to be successful with. So, or reaching out to those individuals, either master gardeners or experienced gardeners that have some dirt under their nails to be able to get their opinions as well. So it's a combination of tools that we can use, and this is just one of them. On average, if we got a good year, last year was not a good year for most of Texas, but on average, we get about 50 inches of rain per year. So just having a basic understanding of this information helps us to be better gardeners, helps us to be more successful gardeners. Now, now you have information about where you're at, what kind of environmental conditions you have. Now base that on the plants that you're thinking about using. Get to know the plant that you're thinking of using. What is natural environment? What is its natural distribution? Most of the species that I mentioned, occur in tropical areas of the world. If you look at this map, there's this broad band, a general band of where these plants occur. They occur in the tropics, and the tropics have a wet and dry season. They really don't have a winter as we experience it, or spring. I visited Costa Rica one year. I had the pleasure of going down to Costa Rica, and it was explained to me they have a wet and a dry season. They do not have a spring and fall and winter time. Average temperatures during in the tropics can go anywhere from 77 degrees to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. There are variable rain events. So there are areas within the tropics that get a lot of rain per year, like in the Amazon basin, over 9 feet um, of water per year. Compare that with other areas of the dry tropics, which is the Sahara Desert. North Africa, they can get less than inch of rain to uh, a little bit over 3 inches of rain per year. So the tropics themselves do the environment that plants exist in have to exist in a hot and dry season that stimulates vegetative sprouts. So we understand that these plants are tropical plants. They perform best in temperatures averaging between 77 to 82 degrees. They they if they undergo a hot, dry season, it will stimulate vegetative growth. Understanding that helps us to understand when it's time to put these plants out or propagate them or have them start performing for us in our landscape. In our region, as the soil temperatures rise, rhizomes break dormancy. So that means that sometime around mid-March or late March or early April, most of the plants that we're working with, all of the ornamental gingers that we're working with are going to start breaking dormancy, and you'll start seeing vegetation emerging from the soil at that point in time. Now, a little bit about the plant and flower parts. Most of the plants that we're talking about can be aromatic, but all are herbaceous, meaning they're herbs, right? Soft tissue, not woody tissue. They spread themselves vegetatively by creeping tuberous rhizomes. They produce alternate large strap leaves, and when the leaves are emerging, the sheaths overlap to form a pseudostem. So they don't produce an actual woody stem that we're used to, like in a tree or 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 other or a shrub. They'll produce what's called a pseudostem. So that basically is just herbaceous vegetative tissue that's overlapping each other and creates this structure. Excuse me, that the leaves keep rocking and emerging on. I didn't have a good picture of a rhizome, so at least I've got something that I can show you through this illustration. So again, this is a cutting that I took of a variegated ginger in my backyard. You might see this as you're cruising through areas like Clear Lake. There's a few of these gingers that I've seen planted out in people's yards. I've got one in my backyard. It performs really successfully, and this picture is what I mean by a pseudostem. It's just overlapping leaves. Now, as far as the flower goes, which part of this do you think is the flower? And this is kind of a leading question because I think it's very obvious what it is. What we're looking at a ginger flower, it is, that entire structure that we're looking at right now, that is a flower, but the actual business part of the flower is located is a tiny little orange tubular shaped flower, right? That will be positioned right above some of the bracts. So the flowers emerge between these vegetative flower parts called the bract, right? So again, the bract is a vegetative part of the flower itself, and the flower emerges right above the bract itself. That's where the business part is happening. That's where nectar is produced. That is where the pollen is produced. All of these plants produce complete flowers, meaning they have all reproductive organs within the flower itself. And the showy part, right? The bracts are the part that really shine for us. When we're looking at what I'm attracted to in a ginger plant are these beautiful structures, that are comprised of the bracts. Anyway, I just had to talk a little bit about the physiology of the plant so that we understand, what we're looking at. Um, Now, as far as propagation, you can propagate these plants by seed. Some will produce the seed, some of it's viable, some of it's not. Successful commercial propagation is by division of the rhizomes. It's a lot quicker to divide a rhizome than it is trying to raise a plant by seed. In this case, It's become a very viable commercial product. When we're doing this, when we're propagating by division, it's best to do this during the dormant period, and that could be anywhere between now and April. If you're going to do this, though, I would suggest adding heating mats to the equation. Um, you want to maintain soil temperature between 75 to 90 degrees to keep these plants active and growing successfully. So you can divide the rhizomes. You can bury them in a pot in soil, um, in a media, but and you can do this without a heating mat. They'll just go dormant. Leaves will not emerge. But if you wanted to start encouraging the plant to be a little more vigorous, you can apply a little bit of heat to the bottom of that to that plant through a heat mat, and it'll break dormancy and start rocking out for you. Now, as far as dividing them, remember these plants during our winter are deciduous. So once they do go deciduous, and all of mine have, I have a collection of gingers, of what we commonly call tulip gingers, in a half whiskey barrel. It's about 25-gallon plastic whiskey barrel, and I don't want to run the risk of losing the plants that I have out of my landscape. So I keep them all in a whiskey barrel. About 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, about a month ago, they started going deciduous. All of those leaves just started, shriveling and dying back. The plants are still viable. The rhizomes are still viable, but now they've gone dormant because the soil temperature has gotten cool. So I just popped it into my garage for protection. If we do get a hard freeze, which might happen, we're in zone 9B, folks, or at least the majority of us are. Potentially those cold temperatures can affect plants in a container rather than in the ground. There's no insulation for them in a container, not really. So I've got them in my garage. They're going to be. I'm looking at them thinking, well, you're just happy as a clam sitting there, right? I don't have to mess with them. Don't have to water them. Just let them go dormant. So once they are dormant, remove them from the soil at the beginning of their dormancy. Wash and dry those rhizomes. And then you can keep them in a cool, dry place. So you can keep them out of the soil. I've decided to go ahead and keep mine in soil. They're going to be just fine. If you do decide to propagate them outside a soil environment, you want them to dry out a little bit, place them on a newsprint, like a newspaper, that allows a little bit of air movement. But I would suggest to put them in the garage, someplace a little bit cool, that they can sit in dormancy for a while. Now, if you want to, you can consider what's called a callus box. Mr. Jim Camus, he's a fruit specialist with AgriLife Extension out in Fredericksburg. He has this illustration is from his method of propagating fig trees, and so he's taking stems. He puts them in a box that has cedar shavings. So the cedar shavings provide a little bit of antimicrobial, activity for those stems. He just buries them in that. I don't believe he moistens the cedar shavings. He just lets them rock out like that in a dormant state, in a cool dormant state, all during winter until it's time for him to actively propagate them. So you can store these rhizomes in what's called a callus box. Divide the rhizomes into sections, and when you do that, always leave a few buds in each section. Right, so the buds themselves you'll have to imagine with this illustration that I have here, that there will be little buds that will form along that rhizome, and that's the new growing point of this plant. So always remember to keep a few of those, so that you'll have vegetation in the springtime when it gets a little warmer. Now, as far as planting these rhizomes, I recommend to put them in an enriched, well-drained soil. Some of these plants, some species can be planted in variable textured soil. So what does that mean? When I was horticulture agent over in Brazoria County, there is a demonstration garden over there that's called the Brazoria Environmental Education Station. They call it BEES, like the bee, for short, BEES plural. And they do have a tropical garden over there. This is one feature we have not developed or identified here at our Discovery Garden. We've got a really great garden here, but we haven't developed an exhibit just exclusively to tropical plants. We have tropical plants intermixed amongst our exhibits at our demonstration garden. Brazoria Environmental Education Station, in their tropical garden, they have unimproved beds and they have a hedychium. It's a hardy ginger. I think that's the common name for it. Really tall specimens, and they were growing in like clay, right? And the plants were performing outstandingly. But I would suggest to you to, if you have ginger species, until you get to know them and cultivate them for a while, anticipate just to plant them in enriched, well-drained soil that can handle frequent period, a little bit of moisture saturation at times, but that is not, these plants aren't going to sit in standing water. Now, as far as planting the rhizomes, again, take the rhizome crown. You're going to plant that about a half an inch to an inch below the soil level, so not too deep. You could get away with 2 inches, that would be fine. But just ensure that these plants are not buried too deeply. They do have the potential for rotting in place. Uh, you're going to take the engorged tuberous storage roots down, right? So make sure those eyes are pointed up, and if you can identify the roots on the end of that bulbous mass, go ahead and put those down. That just goes without saying. Their growth habit: there are some plants that grow in dense clumps and have a low profile, like the genera Camphora or Curcuma. Others can grow 4 to 6 feet tall. So if you're considering putting these plants in the ground, keep that in mind. Plants like genera hedychium or the hardy gingers, they get super tall. I'm 6'4", and I have some in the backyard that have now reached my nose, right? They're starting to go a little bit dormant right now. There's still formed a dense clump, and they're starting to spread a little bit. So as long as you know that, you'll know where to put it in your garden. The lower profile ones, like the tulip ginger, which is genera curcuma, those can be planted up front. All right, let's get into the meat of this, the bells of the ball. This is genera alpinia. In general, they're called shell ginger. They're called shell ginger because of these beautiful shell-like structures that the flowers form. They're from tropical Southeast Asia, so they have a broad distribution within Southeast Asia. Often they're grown in subtropical, high humid environments, so they'll work well here in our county as well as Brazoria County, all the way into Fort Bend County, maybe north. I'll have to ask my colleague Mike Potter, who's the horticulture agent in Conroe in Montgomery County, if they grow ginger up that far as well. Now, keep in mind that shell ginger will get tall. They can get 6 to 8 feet tall, and that's just by the vegetation. Once the flowers start pushing out, they're not going to raise up, right? They've got a lot of weight on them. There's going to be clusters of these flowers, and typically when the flower is expressed, it starts to become a little pendulous, right? It kind of hangs down a little bit. It looks beautiful. Um, these are propagated by rhizome and division. I would suggest, if you're working with shell ginger, to avoid saturated soil. So if you've got a high clay content, maybe put them in a raised bed, or find an area in your yard which doesn't hold a lot of water. Water won't sit on it after a rain event. This is an example, the one on the lower right-hand side of the one that I showed you a few moments ago with the pseudostem. This is the variegated form of the alpinia. It's a cross between Alpinia formosana and Zarambed. This is the variegated form, very, very popular in coastal landscapes. It doesn't have a very high profile. It gets about knee high, or maybe my thigh high, right? About 4 feet tall. But it is cold tolerant. So I think this is one of the more successful ones that can be grown. It's beautiful from the variegation of its leaves. I've got some in my backyard. For those of us that are working with ginger plants, ornamental ginger plants, you know that they can start to spread. Some can be a little bit aggressive, but not on an annual basis. I put This this particular plant on the lower right-hand side is a picture I took from the Brazoria County demonstration garden. The one I have at home is a small clump. It is spreading, but it's not spreading aggressively. I've been in this house, my wife and I have been in this rental for 2 years, and it's staying in place. It is spreading slowly, but it will spread, and so I can easily dig those out, right? Just dig them out of the ground and go about my day. So the one thing I like about these shell gingers is they don't spread too aggressively, and they look beautiful in the landscape, either flowers or in this case through the leaves. Now, this is a plant that I came across at the demonstration garden in Brazoria County. I thought it was a cardamom, right? Cardamom the spice. Cardamom the spice is a member of the Zingiberaceae. It is a a ginger, right? Ginger plant. And the leaves smelled wonderful. They had that anise-like scent to it. It smelled great, but the flower that was produced was completely different from images that I saw on the interwebs, right? So what was advertised, we corrected that. You know, I said, this is not a true cardamom. We can't grow cardamom successfully here. What this is, I identified it as what's called a false cardamom. So it is an Alpinia, genera Alpinia species nutans. It's from tropical Molucca Islands, which are located in Indonesia. They kind of maintain their stature about 4 foot tall and wide. They do can exist in moist soil, but I do recommend, of course, well draining soil. So you can, however you attain that, that's up to you. They've got a wonderful fragrance to them, especially if you walk by it and brush up against it. The difference between the two, of course, are the fruiting structure, which is what you're looking at here. This is the fruiting structure of the false cardamom, and that's the flower of it. The basic difference between the two is true cardamom has no scent to its leaves, right? It's all about the fruit that it produces. So I find that fascinating and very interesting, and it's good to know that we can grow a plant that has a great fragrance. The flowers aren't, you know, something to write home to mom about, but it's that fragrance that I get from the leaves that keeps it in my backyard. And I do have this planted in the backyard of the place we're in. Some of you may have been exposed to plants that we call spiral ginger. These have been separated into another plant family. So Zingiberaceae was the overarching was the family that all gingers were placed under because of its unique characteristics. Botanist taxonomists has separated it out into a plant family called Costaceae. It's still a ginger. We're still going to call it, you know, a ginger. It's just in a different plant family, and that is either genera costus or Chilicostus. Now these can get a little bit taller. Typically, they're not, you know, dense, bunching, strap-like leaves. The unique characteristic of these plants is they produce these wonderful spiral pseudostems that emerge singly. So they don't really grow in a dense cluster of leaves. Rather, they emerge as these beautiful shapes that curve around. That's how they get their name, spiral ginger. There are some species that have red stems, and it just looks outstanding. I've got one in my house right now. I did not want it to go dormant. I didn't want to lose that the foliage on it. I wanted to extend the joy, so I brought it indoors. Still has its foliage, still has those beautiful red stems. I keep it warm in my house because I'm a Texan. I don't like it cold. And so therefore, the plant is doing great. Um, Again, these plants of vegetation is spirally arranged pseudostems. One side, if you look at these, they'll have waxy leaves on a waxy surface of the part of their leaves. They do produce terminal cone-shaped inflorescence, terminal cone-shaped flowers with closely overlapping bracts. This is what the flowers look like. These are not fragrant, but where they really shine is the structure themselves, those stems, those beautiful pseudostems, as well as these really fascinating flowers. Remember, The bright orange parts are the bracts. That's a vegetative part of the flower. You can see the actual flower emerging to the right on the top of that floral structure. I do recommend to put them in improved soils. They are somewhat drought tolerant, meaning they can go a little dry, but don't let them dry out completely. Don't let these plants in the landscape or in a container. Um, don't let that soil dry out completely. The plant will start responding with burned leaves. It just won't be happy. The cool thing about these plants is you can grow them successfully in partial sun, right? Or in dappled shade, or when you're walking along a trail and you're in a woodland and you kind of emerge from that and you have the woodland's edge. That kind of light exposure is best for these plants. Here's another costus. It's a spiral ginger. It's called the red tower ginger. So this picture, I attended a conference at Mercer Botanic Garden. It was a public conference. It was called their Tropical Symposium. And this was like 6 years ago. This is the first time that I met, she didn't know it, but this is the first time I met our plumeria lady, who I'm losing her name because I'm hungry right now. Sorry about that, folks. Anyway, it's the first time I met her, and I was just really impressed, with the knowledge, especially from an experienced grower, and it was my first introduction to Galveston County, really. So anyway, too many good things about that tropical symposium, but this is where I fell in love with ginger, and I was sold. I saw the picture of this particular flower. It wasn't in flower at the time. I saw this picture and I'm like, oh, dang, I got to have that plant. So I bought one of these and several others that you'll see in this presentation. Now, these can get a little bit tall, 6 foot to 8 foot tall. You might have to support those stems. Since the stems themselves are pseudostems, it's kind of, it's not woody tissue. You may, on occasion, and as these flowers start to express, they get big, they get a little heavy. Sometimes I can make the entire stem drop over or droop. So you may have to support those with some sort of a stake. So these can get a little bit tall, like the other costus. They can handle part sun. You can grow them in full sun with adequate moisture. So you got to get a little bit more water to these plants. Now keep in mind that they may freeze to the ground, but they have the potential for coming back, emerging in mid-spring for us. Now, a beautiful plant like this is very, very attractive to some of the fauna that we have around our area, hummingbirds when they're migrating through. So I can't say enough good things about this particular ginger species. Here's another one. It's a spiral ginger, but this one has a very low profile. I've got I, I've got a I've got a I divided this. I bought this particular plant. I've got it at home. I promised Pam that I would divide it out. And Pam, if you're on watching me tonight, keep in mind that I'm going to follow through on my promise. You're getting a half of my spiral ginger because I divided it the other day. It's doing great. So this particular ginger is from Africa, Cassis tapambachianus. It produces a vegetation that emerges about 3 foot tall in a container. Mine's not that tall, but if I got it in the ground, I'd probably get a little bit taller. It is a tip bloomer. The blooms are interesting, but I think of this plant as more of providing interesting texture in the landscape. So if you do put it in the landscape, put it up front, you'll see those tiny little curling stems on it. It will produce a kind of a pink flower. Mine has not. But that's neither here nor there. I've got it for the interesting vegetative texture that it produces. They are a tender perennial, so I've kept this one in a container. So even though I said, potentially if you put it in your landscape, well, it depends on what kind of protection you have for that, right? So I'd suggest to go ahead and keep this in a container and grow it that way. You can put it in a long rectangular container that can simulate a border planting, and then the plant will be just fine. Here's an interesting one that I saw when I did a field trip out to Mercer Botanic Garden. Folks, I suggest that, as a group, as master gardeners, we all have our own social friends within the organization. We're all friends, right? But, maybe sometime we can get together a field trip and go out to Mercer, especially in midsummer when it's a little challenging for us to walk around around their gardens. That's really when these gingers shine because they love it hot and they love it humid. And they've got an outstanding collection at Mercer Botanic Garden. And this is a picture that I took of one of their spiral gingers. It's I don't have a common name for it, but I love the variegation on this. It's just outstanding. Looks very similar to the Alpinia that I showed you a few moments ago. So the Alpinia, the variegated ginger that I showed you a few slides ago, that one's great for your landscape. It performs great in a landscape planting. This one is a very unique specimen. If you happen to obtain a plant like this, make sure it's a single or maybe planted in threes so it'll shine in your landscape. Here's another hybrid that I saw at Mercer Botanic Garden. It's called Pina Colada. It just has a little bit more blonde showing on the bracts. But you can kind of, from this picture, you can see how they grow in mass. So again, it's not a dense shrub like, herbaceous leaves that are growing together. Rather, these are stems that are emerging up. They've been able to cultivate this into a little bit of a pseudo hedge out at Mercer Botanic. I hope you all are doing okay. We're about 40 minutes into the program. We'll be winding up on time, I think. So thank you again for joining me this evening. This is a species, this is a ginger form. Genera is Chilicostus. This is a species called speciosus. So I got easy on that one. But in general, these are called the crepe gingers. So far we've looked at spiral ginger. We've looked at Alpinia. I can't remember what the common name on those, so bear with me on that. And these are commonly referred to as crepe gingers because of that kind of petticoat-like shape of the flowers when they're fully expressed. So these are from Southeast Asia, and they have a natural distribution from India all the way over to the islands in Australia. They can grow to 6 foot tall. Typically, they'll grow in a row of spirally arranged leaves. So they have these pseudo stems that kind of emerge almost similar to a spiral cactus, not quite, that curvy shape of the spiral cactus. They are propagated vegetatively. They are naturally dispersed by seed, but I would suggest again that, if you're going to obtain a plant, it is more than likely it's been vegetatively propagated, and that's how it gets to you. Some of these species can have red colored stems, but they all produce a crepe-like flower expressed from red cones. They make a great screening or border planting. Here's an example of a cluster of the pink crepe ginger. Again, same species, different cultivar, different cultivar cultivated from this species, right? Pink form here, the white form that I showed you a few moments ago. Here's what the flower looks like up close. Isn't that outstanding? That's just breathtaking. When I was walking along the trails at Mercer Botanic Garden, by the way, I'm not promoting any endorsing products or botanic gardens. I'm just telling you where I was at when I was walking along the trails. That just really stood out, caught my attention. These are the group of ginger plants that we commonly will see at nurseries. You know what I'm talking about. You walked into a home improvement store, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, and you're going into their nursery section and it's midsummer, and you're seeing them selling, buckets of these plants at outrageous prices. This is what you're looking at. It's a tulip ginger. The genera is curcuma. There's determined to be approximately 80 species. The ones that we'll commonly see are species Alismatifolia. They're very common, and hybrids from Alismatifolia. They come from Thailand. These plants will go dormant November through April. So some of the other gingers that I showed you, like the hardy ginger, the Alpinias, sometimes the Costas, will retain their vegetation through the winter time. Of course, common sense tells us if you get a cold snap, right, if you get a freezing temperature, it's going to affect the vegetation. But in general, the The Apineas will keep their vegetation all year round. Mostly, it's mostly an evergreen. But for the curcumas, they do go dormant. Once it starts getting cool, that's it, man. They start dropping, their leaves start shriveling up. They start going into a dormant state, through the rhizome. They will emerge in late spring, and your late spring could be different from my late spring, depending on where we're at. Once the weather starts warming up, right, and that could be anywhere like late April. Sometimes you'll have a type of ginger called a hidden ginger that will emerge vegetatively a little earlier, or maybe produce a flower first and then the foliage. Regardless, once it starts warming up, that's when these plants start responding. They have a low profile, about 3 foot tall by 2 foot wide. They will bloom. They'll begin blooming for us as it gets warmer. So sometime around that could be anywhere from late May, early June, all the way into August. You can grow these in a indirect exposure to light, indirect bright light, partial sun. You can keep them indoors in a container, but you do have to put them right up against the window, right? Because we just don't get enough sunlight. When we're interior scaping, we're cutting back on the light exposure that we get because of the windows that we have, et cetera. So um, outside, you can put them under protection of other trees or other landscaping plants, and they'll do just fine. So the one that I did talk about, the hidden ginger, some flowers do emerge before the foliage, but that's just a generality for this. So when you see the term hidden ginger, bank on it. These are curcumas, right, that we're looking at. Now, interestingly enough, the plant that we use medicinally as well as culinarily, turmeric, is a curcuma. It is a ginger from South Asia. It's been used. It's had documentation of being used as a culinary and medicinal for over 4,000 years. It's very popular in the Vedic culture in India. So these are pictures that I took of my plants and of landscape plants that I've found in Herman Park. They're just outstanding. They come in variety of colors. They've been developed over time. So a little bit about Tulip Ginger hybridization, the color. So I extracted these excerpts from this particular publication. So you'll bear with me as I fumble through this, right? As far as hybridizing these plants, anthocyanins, right? These are anthocyanins were detected in the bracts of 6 curcuma species. So these specific species, Alismatifolia, cordata, globa, Mayan marensis, rubota, and sparginifolia, blah. Those contained some of the basic coloration that hybrids were developed from. Anthocyanin was not detected in white bracts of 3 species. So Glassamilla, Harmondii, Parpifolia, as well as the white bracts of Alismatifolia, Mysore jasmine. So again, these basic 6 species is where we get a lot of different coloration from. They've been hybridized with those individual species. Those that do not have coloration were developed from these remaining species that I have on this list. So here's a plant that I've cultivated, and I think I successfully killed it. Even experienced horticulturists kill plants. That's how we learn, right? So this is one hybrid with the name Emerald Choco Zebra. What I really liked about this plant was that wonderful variegation on the bracts. It had this almost chocolate color, but it was more richer than a chocolate, right? A little bit more red. It's considered to be a hybrid from northern Thailand. It's a cross between Alismatifolia and several other species. Produces a tall scape, meaning those flowers emerge and they raise up about 2 feet tall. They're a very popular cut flower. So once the flower fully expressed itself, I cut it and I kept it in a vase for almost 2 months, and it still retained that form. It's amazing how long some of these gingers can retain their shape as a cut flower. They will bloom in early summer to early autumn, and they do go dormant late October. And mine is not disappointed. It's already gone dormant, and it's in the garage. This is one that I was really happy with. And again, I bought these at the Mercer Botanic Garden Symposium that I was at. This is a variety called of Alismatifolia, a hybrid of Alismatifolia called Maijo Jasmine. Produces this gorgeous, pure white bracts. I just really love this plant. And this one I did keep alive, which I'm really proud of. There is a variety called Maijo Elite, or a hybrid called Maijo Elite. It produces a little bit more pink blush on the bracts itself, not pure white. Here's another Tulip Ginger. This is just one that picture that I took out at Mercer Botanic Garden. The leaves were a little bit larger, almost like a banana leaf, but the flower still emerged only about 3 feet tall off of the plant. This is one called Suli Sunshine. I just love the variety of coloration you get from Tulip Gingers. Here's a species of curcuma called Pride of Burma. I've been able to manage to keep this one alive, and it just looks outstanding when it's blooming. It's cultivated from found naturally distributed in Thailand to Myanmar. It can be an evergreen with a short dormant period in our region, but I'm telling you, folks, mine went dormant, so it's hanging out as a rhizome in the media in my container. Gets to be about 2 to 3 feet tall. It is a popular plant, but it can be difficult to cultivate. So I've not attempted to cultivate my rhizomes. I'm a little I don't want to mess up and kill the plant, so I'm just letting it go inside of my container. This is just what I've read. They will bloom from early summer to early autumn, and they, true to form, it's going dormant. This is a different genera of ginger. This is called Hedychium. These are the hardy gingers. These are tall plants. They produce masses of flower, often with very bold foliage. Pseudostems can raise up about 6 feet tall. In its native habitat, they emerge in the monsoon season. So you can work with these plants in enriched to variable soils. These were the ones that were at their discovery garden in Brazoria County in their tropical garden. We found them in dense clay, and they were doing just fine. They can handle neutral to slightly acidic soils, which we have here in our landscape. They can handle part to full sun. They'll bloom a little bit better with a little bit of protection, though. They produce really thick rhizomes. They can be a little bit aggressive, and if you use these plants in the landscape, put them in the background, because they're going to emerge tall, loud, and proud, and they will spread a little bit. So you've got to pay attention to them, right? A little bit more aggressively than some of the other ginger that I've talked about. Most of these are Hedychium coccineum hybrids with varying heights, bloom time, and color. So if you look online and you're interested in finding hardy ginger, you'll find a lot of variability in them. One that has been successfully cultivated, and these can be cold-tolerant plants, right? Hardy gingers in general. One that's been successfully cultivated, and I have had reports from as far north as Tyler, growing in their landscape, right? And their landscape planting is one we call butterfly ginger. This one produces a very aromatic white flower. The flower's named from the shape of the flower, right? Butterfly ginger. Very fragrant. It's great, and it can bloom in a denser shade. If you've got it with a little bit of sun exposure, it performs really well in dense shade as well. Here is one. This is a picture of a true ginger that I have that just went dormant that I put in my garage. I keep it separate from the curcumas, right? So this is a true ginger. They're from Southeast Asia, Thailand. These tropicals are from Southeast Asia, from Thailand, China, India, and New Guinea. These are used as culinarily and medicinal. This specific plant that we're looking at, I do not use it that way, and I've not seen reports of it being used medicinally or as a culinary plant. So I'm using it as an ornamental plant. I'm not going to experiment with my health. Thank you very much. What's produced from these are the beehive gingers, which is species spectabile, or the shampoo ginger. And there's one variety called Darcii, which I have. That's what it is. It's a variegated foliage. I apologize. I don't have, because this is a public program, I didn't have permission to use images that I found online, so I can't offer that to you. If you have a chance, look up the term shampoo ginger. They produce these outstanding beehive-like structures. They're beautiful. And I had mine flower this year. Here's a plant that Stephen failed in. I cultivated it for several years, and I um, finally almost killed it. And then I cultivated it, the vegetation back to health, and I gifted it to our wonderful Pam that manages the pergola garden. Um, Pam, shout out! You've got a good plant and a great home. But this is what it looked like when I was doing the right things. Right. This is called the dancing ladies ginger. Genera globa, species Winnidii. It's native to Myanmar and Thailand. It's dormant most of the year, so you've got to have a lot of patience with this plant. Foliage emerges once it starts getting bloody hot outside in July. And this is why it's got its name. It produces this very unique flower. It looks like a little dancing person at the end of that peduncle of that flower stalk. That's a close up of it in my house before Steven started messing up with it. But very very interesting plant. I've seen these planted in the landscape at Mercer Botanic Garden, right? But again, it's a plant that you're going to have to have a lot of patience with. If you don't see any foliage, you've got it as a rhizome, but you don't see any action by July, then something's wrong, right? It may have rotted out. You can dig it out, see if it's still intact, and what you need to adjust to cultivate it, or gift it to a friend who knows what they're doing. Here's a hybrid that I saw at Mercer Botanic Garden. This is a hybrid called Shibui, Dancing Ladies Ginger. Anyway, I just love the way those bracts stack up, and then those tiny little dancing figures at the end of those bracts. So this was the inspiration for it all. I attended a program July 13th, 2019 at Mercer Botanic Gardens. Keynote speaker was Timothy Chapman. He's owner of Gingerwood Nursery in Louisiana. It was Loretta Osteen that I met for the first time. And I was just so impressed with the knowledge that Loretta had and the workshop that she gave. It really turned me on to all of these plants, including plumeria. So thank you to Loretta for that inspiration. So folks, these are wonderful plants. Certainly they are tropical plants, but we can work with them in our subtropical environment. They can be planted in the landscape. They make outstanding signature plants in a container. Some of them make wonderful cut flowers. There's the one on the lower right-hand side. That's the Pride of Burma flower that I cultivated. And then you can see you can get a little bit of crazy with your flower arrangements, as indicated by the picture on the right-hand side. So I can't say enough good things about ginger. I think they're a great accent for our landscapes, and I certainly encourage you to consider them. Some of the resources that you can go to. Now, again, this program is being recorded. I'll also send a copy of this presentation to y'all, or at least this slide, so at least you'll know where you can go to find information. Kew Botanic Gardens, that's the resource that I used for these plants. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen now for this part of the presentation, because I want to show you the resources that I've got on those web pages. So if you'll bear with me just for a minute. So as far as identification goes, there are places that I went to get accurate information, right? You can dial up any information on the interwebs, on your favorite browser, all you want to. How do you know if the information is accurate? Specifically, if you go to resources like Kew Botanic Gardens, you'll get outstanding information. This is Singapore National Parks developed a flora and fauna web, and that's where I got a lot of my information as far as distribution of some of these plants. Kew Botanic Gardens supports an online resource called the Plants of the World Online. You can go there for detailed description of some of these plants. Let's do this really quick. Let's look at curcuma, right? Type in curcuma and ta-da, get some great information. this resource is mostly about natural distribution of these plants, right? So, but I did get to pick up additional information about some of these plants from this website. Native range of species is in India of Curcuma caulina. Doesn't mean you can get this plant online. Just it's just another resource where you can identify and get more accurate information. Does anybody have any questions? I know I went a little bit over time. If there are no questions, then I will bid you adieu. My I'm getting hungry. My wife misses me, and my cat does as well. Thank y'all for joining me this evening.